Hello, this is Professor Charles Jeffries from Seattle Central College, and I'm gonna do part 3 or episode 3.
Oh, Mike.
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, I'm Professor Charles Jeffries of Seattle Central College, and we're going to focus today on the history of psychology. This is from the Aristotle's Plagiarist series, and so let's think about that. In terms of psychology, let's define psychology. Psychology is a study of human behavior and information processing. Okay. And the two main areas of psychology: applied psychology and research psychology. Applied psychology is using basic principles of psychology to help people. Research psychology is the quest for knowledge. Applied, majority of people in applied psychology are counselors, some form of counselors, psychotherapists, relationship therapists, those type of issues. Whereas research, most people in research teach. Okay, I know a lot of times I go to social settings and so, what do you do? And I say I teach. And then, what do you teach? I say I teach psychology. And you say, oh no, you're trying to psychoanalyze me. No, I don't teach. I don't practice it. I just teach it. Okay. And so we're going to look at that in terms of the field. There are 4 goals of psychology. Okay. 4 goals of psychology: description, explanation, prediction, and control. Describe, to paint a mental picture. In other words, someone says describe your living room, or describe your best friend, or describe your kitchen or your bedroom. Okay, you're painting a mental picture for that person. And in psychology, it's really important to have an accurate description, because the more accurate your description is, it'll take you to the next goal. Okay, and one of the things that psychologists use to get agreement among observers is what they call operational definitions, and that's to describe a concept by the operations used to measure it. In other words, how do you find height? Well, by feet and inches. Okay, how do you find weight? By pounds or kilograms. Okay, things that people can measure. Okay, and it's really important to have that accurate description, because that takes us to the next level: explanation. Trying to make sense out of what this person or this people did. Okay, you ever go to a restaurant or a social setting with somebody you thought you knew really well, and they did something that wasn't appropriate, it threw you off? Okay, so the first thing that comes up is you're going to ask them or maybe ask yourself, why did they do that? So what you're doing is you observe something. Now you're trying to make sense out of why did this person do what they did or say what they said. Okay, and then so once again, that's where the importance of operational definitions are: getting agreement among observers. For instance, you can have 5 trained clinical psychologists observing one child get different interpretations of what that child is doing. Well, Johnny is trying to express his latent edible issues, or Johnny's trying to reach a certain level of self-esteem, or Johnny's working through the primal rooms, and the kids playing with blocks. Okay, the stacking one block on the other, making a certain shape, but all these different interpretations. And so that's the whole idea behind operational definitions. Let's define things that we can count and see. We'll talk about John Watson later about that. And this for your explanation. The more accurate your explanation is, the better able you to predict what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen next. When I say predict, I'm not like psychic. Oh, someone's going to sit down there and go to a psychic or read your palms or look in the candle and make something happen. No, I'm talking about prediction based on previous observations and accurate descriptions of those observations. Okay, and so and a good theory, a strong theory, has predictive power. A strong theory has predictive power, and that's in psychology in particular, and social sciences in general. There's a lot of good literature out there, but can they predict anything? Okay, and that's what we're talking about. See, psychology has evolved into a science. Okay, like I said, the science of the study of human behavior and information processing. And one reason it's a science, because it makes accurate predictions through controlled conditions. And then once you understand what's going on and you can make predictions, you can basically influence what's going to happen in the future. Control. Example, maybe some of you people work with preschool kids or nursery school kids and say most days the kids are pretty mellow, but this Tuesday and last Friday they're fighting and running around and breaking stuff and screaming. And then upon observations, you notice that on those days that they are acting out, they had sugar products, donuts or pancakes or something like that. And so now you have an explanation on the days that they have pancakes, they're going to act a certain way. So if you can predict that based on what you've seen in the past, you can basically say, well, okay, now we can take control. Well, how do you control that? Well, don't give them sweets. Okay, so there's how the 4 goals of psychology kind of go together. So now what I want to do is talk about the history of psychology. The history of psychology. Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn was a science professor at Yale University in the 1960s. He wrote this book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Okay, if you've heard your term paradigm shift, okay, that was actually one of Kuhn's concepts, one of the concepts that Kuhn came up with. But, tell me about that. One of the basic assumptions of his book, or one of the implications, what he's saying in Scientific Revolutions, is that science changes with the times. Science changes with the time. What they call science in the 1600s is almost a joke today. Okay, what they call science fiction today might be science fact in the future. And I'm okay with science changing, because if it doesn't change, it means it becomes stagnant. And what Kuhn describes is how the evolution of science goes. It goes from one group of people define truth, okay, and that truth is held up for a particular time. And the questions start coming that theory can't handle. And from that, you get a period of confusion, as Kuhn referred to, a scientific revolution, and then a new school of thought comes up. And that's where we're talking about the paradigm shift, okay? And that's what we're going to describe. That's one you have to think about when you look at the history of science, but the history of almost anything comes like that. Also, another thing Kuhn talked about is your greatest contributors to science are extremely young or from outside the field. Your greatest contributors to science tend to be extremely young or from out, because they don't know what they're not supposed to do. And so, let's look at that and put this within the context of psychology. I mean, psychology is a combination between 2 disciplines, physiology and philosophy. Philosophy is the study of thoughts and ideas, physiology, the study of body. So we're going to first talk about your physiologists, and then from the physiologists, we're going to move on and talk a little bit about some philosophers first, and we'll talk about the physiologists later. Okay, but think about the study of thoughts and ideas. And we're going to start as it relates to psychology, and we're talking about Western psychology. And so we're going to begin with Descartes. Okay, Descartes. Descartes was a part of a result to a certain extent of a group of veterans returning from a series of wars called the Crusades. Okay, and these veterans are returning with new clothing material, cotton, new tools, telescopes, magnifying glasses, a number system, zero. And so all these information was returning from these folks who had been to Eastern Africa and Western Asia, coming out with these new ideas and new concepts. And during during Descartes' time, or Descartes was a part of that movement called that Renaissance. Okay, and Descartes was considered the doubter. The doubter. Okay, and his contribution to psychology was he came up with the idea of the mind and the body. The mind controls the body, and the body keeps the mind alive. In reality, now they've been talking about that in Zen for thousands of years before Descartes was even born. Okay, but it's new to Western Europe because, like I said, the church defines science. You ever read Shakespeare or Macbeth or Beckett in this time period during the so-called that early time period, 1714, 13, 1200s, 1500s? Okay, during that time period, the church had a lot of power. The church defined truth to a certain extent. Okay, there was a debate one time where they're trying to determine how many teeth a horse had in his mouth. And one person in the audience raised his hand. Why don't you open the mouth up and count them? That was the worst thing. They threw him in jail behind that. Okay, because he was outside the scientific community. But think about that in terms of church defined science. Okay. And this is where back to Descartes, the whole idea of mind and the body, getting away from the body and the soul and looking at the mind and the body. Okay. And even religion evolves to a certain extent. Okay. In terms of you think about, I think in 1990s, maybe early 2000s, the scholars in the Anglican Church, the Church of England, declare that you don't burn in hell. Okay, according to your biblical scholars in the Anglican Church, they came up with the idea, well, you don't burn in hell. And so as we speak now, they're redefining hell. Okay, my question is, what's going to happen to all those people who died before 1990? Do they get grandfathered in, or do they have to burn in hell? But either way, you think about that in terms of the concept, and even burning hell is questionable. Okay, when you start thinking about that. Okay, but back to Descartes, the whole idea, these new ideas were coming, these number systems coming, these tools are coming in, these ideas are coming. I mean, think about this. In Western Europe at that particular time, they were using Roman numerals. You ever try to multiply or divide with Roman numerals? So it's what we're talking about, all this information coming in. Okay, zero, a number representing nothing. Okay, and all these, and so Renaissance was probably a really exciting period of time to be living, because now people are questioning the authority. Well, is the church really right? Well, what's really going on here? And so forth. Next individual I'll talk about is John Locke. I said every theory kind of builds and adds something on to the next theory. So Locke, he kind of agreed with Descartes, the whole idea of the mind and the body. So Locke started his own school of thought called empiricism. And so he's saying basically, okay, if there's a mind and a body, then let my focus be on how the mind acquires knowledge. How the mind acquires knowledge. And according to Locke and his empiricists, the mind acquires knowledge through experience. Now, here's one of the people who came up with the idea of a blank slate. Children neither good nor bad, but as they go through life, that slate kind of fills up. Now, this is contrary to a lot of your religious beliefs during that time period, because you go back and look at the Pilgrims and those folks during that time period, Calvinism and all that, it was believed, and they believed in predestination. In other words, the day you were born is already determined whether you're going to go to hell or not. And so Locke is saying, oh, that's bogus. There's no such thing as a born leader. You give me a child, and kind of like Skinner later on said, you give me a child, I'll turn him into anything. There's no such thing as a good person or a bad point, a born leader, or all that information comes in through one's experiences. Now, this was revolutionary during that time period, because like I said before, the church still had a lot of power, okay, during this time period, okay, and these people were challenging all these ideas of the church, okay. And matter of fact, very few people were even to look at the Bible during the time of before Elizabethan time, and during that time period, it was a capital offense to even be in possession of a Bible. Okay, so you had to rely on the authorities. Information. You're not allowed to even look at the Bible. You're have to rely on these people to tell you. That's kind of, to a certain extent, what Protestantism was all about. They're saying, let's make that Bible available for everybody. Let's talk about short break here as far as this weekend. A lot of things going to be going on, particularly in the Seattle area. Number one, we have the Music Day on Friday, okay, and also on Juneteenth this weekend. Okay, that's another major event's going to take place here in the Seattle area. So if you have the opportunity, come out. I'll probably be there for a while too, so you get a chance to meet me if you have the opportunity, and so forth. Okay. So anything else? Okay. So this is kind of where we are today. So let's continue here and come back to John Locke. But think about the idea of there's no good or bad, there's no such thing as a born leader. I mean, you think about hierarchy comes down. It was believed that your child, that's why a lot of your kings had to have male offspring so that they can guarantee their reign. It was just passed down because this person's the son of so-and-so. He's born to be a leader. Whereas John Locke is saying, no, that's not true. It's all about, in terms of that person's experiences. Okay. Next individual, Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte also considered himself to be in the school of empiricism, but he started his own thing. He was one of the founders, or the founder, of sociology, but also his school of thought was called positivism. Positivism. And the focus of positivism was objective observation. Objective, in other words, to observe without bias. See, once again, we're going back to those goals of psychology, talking about description, explanation. Well, between that description and explanation, there's a mediation. Okay, and this is where the bias comes in. Okay, so if you can remove, and I would say it's a great goal. I'm not so sure dealing with humans that people can be perfectly objective, but at least the idea of being objective is possible. But objective observation, and you kind of see that in terms of sociology. Sociology is kind of a cousin to psychology, okay, in the sense that psychology deals with the individual, okay, and whereas sociology deals with the group, and particularly the group's influence on the individual. So if you take a psychology class or sociology class, you'll probably be hearing about a lot of social psychologists like Zimbardo, Walter Mischel, and some other folks like that. Now let's change gears and talk about the physiologist. Physiology, the study of the body. Okay, I said psychology is a combination between philosophy and physiology, or some psychologists say between philosophy and biology, getting more specific. But think about physiology. Okay, and let's first talk about Marshall Hall. Marshall Hall was credited for discovering what we call the reflex arc. Reflex arc. In other words, you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to pull it up before you even think about it. Okay, or you step on a nail. Okay, let's talk about what goes on. You step on a nail, immediately a message goes from your foot up to your spinal cord. One part goes on up to your brain, another part shoots back down your leg. Okay, so by the time the message gets to your brain, your foot's already up. Okay, and so that's what he discovered, that this whole that reflex arc is the loop that goes straight from, in terms straight from the back down. In other words, one of his implications is that reflexes can act independently of thinking. Reflex act independently of thinking. I remember when I taught or I coached youth soccer and youth basketball, and the kids used to hate doing the drills. Oh, coach, why we gotta do these drills, man? Why I gotta study these drills are hard. But you think about what we're really doing with the drills is they're training their reflexes. Okay, we're doing this particular drill all the time. Okay, and so when you get in a game, you automatically do something. And particularly kids, throw me the ball, and they get the ball. Okay, and they don't know what to do with it. But if they go through drills, you're training your reflex to do things automatically. Okay, I mean, think about that. In terms of reflexes act independently of the brain. You ever watch a 3D movie and you put those glasses on and something comes to you, you dodge it, and you know it's not going to hit you, but you dodge it anyway. Okay, that's what Hall is talking about. Your reflexes act independently of your brain. Okay, and that was significant at the time, particularly the idea of the reflex arc. Pierre Florence, he was he started out destroying the various parts of the brain and spinal cord of animals, and as cruel as it sounds, he was able to map out the entire brain. Okay, and he was one of the people credited with putting phrenology out of business. Phrenology, that was a science during Florence's day, and it's basically analyzing one's personality by looking at the lumps or feeling the lumps on their head. So what you would do, you go to a phrenologist's office, and you sit on a chair, and it basically feel your head all the way around. Okay, and from feeling your head all the way around, they had a special chart that tells you if they had a lump on this side of the head, something else was true, or this side of the head, you were intelligent or something. They had a whole chart made out for that. And Florence said, this is bogus. He said, it's bogus. I can prove it. So he took a cat, took the put the cat under anesthesia, took the back part of the cat's brain out, sewed it back up. When the cat woke up, the cat was clumsy, but the cat still went into heat and had kittens. Therefore, sexuality was not in the back of the head as it was assumed by your phrenologists. And as a result, phrenologists went out of business. You think about back to the neurobiological aspect of it, the cat was clumsy after that operation. So I expect he probably cut some part of the cerebellum out. Okay. I mean, most cats are, even when you they see they're really graceful. Okay. And so you think about that. So for that particular, I said, science changes. So it's science called phrenology, and all these assumptions and charts and very specific about it just went down the drain thanks to Pierre Florence. Next individual, Helmholtz. Helmholtz, he was one of the first people to measure a neural impulse. In other words, how fast does it take a message to go to your foot to your brain? Okay. And he was able to measure it in the leg of a frog. Now we have all the technology. We do it all pretty regular, but now they even know how fast they go. In other words, the fastest neural message can go anywhere from 180, 200 miles an hour. Slow ones, maybe 2 miles an hour. But even at 2 miles an hour, a message going from your foot to your brain at 2 miles an hour is extremely fast. Okay. But think about that. Oh, another thing, back to Florence. Florence also did a lot of experimentation with anesthesia. Okay. So if you're a doctor going to anesthesiology, you'll probably read a lot more about Florence. Now let's change gears. Talking about Leipzig, Germany. Leipzig, Germany is considered the birthplace of psychology. And the first person I would talk about at Leipzig was Ernest Weber. Now, I said V instead of Weber. Okay, in German, V is pronounced, the way W is pronounced as V's. So Ernest Weber, he was a physiologist. Okay, and he studied perception. His goal was to make physiology a science like chemistry. In other words, chemistry was a role model for all your other aspiring sciences at that time. Okay, everybody wanted their discipline because chemistry had a periodic table, they had mathematical formulas, they had different principles, Planck's constant, various mathematical that predicted accurately what happens with certain chemicals, certain properties. And so that's what Weber wanted to do with the field of physiology. Okay, he studied perception. Okay, and he came up with what we now call Weber's law. In other words, what a person notices depends upon what they're already experiencing. What a person notices depends on what they're already experiencing. That when you get into memory and learning, we're talking about reliability of eyewitnesses. Okay, a barber, a shoe salesman, a tailor will notice different things about an individual. Okay. Wundt, the founder of psychology. Okay, and he was considered the founder of psychology because he's the first person to actually put psychology within the context of a mathematical or in terms of a laboratory condition. He built the first psychological laboratory. His main method of research is introspection. In other words, I ask you a question, you give me an answer. Okay. He studied perception in its purest form. And just like Weber, he wanted psychology to be a science like chemistry. Okay. And that was the goal of your structuralist, is basically to break down consciousness into its most elemental parts. Okay? But a lot of your critics of Wundt, or a lot of Americans, went to actually everybody who was really into psychology in the late 1800s, early 1900s would go to Leipzig and study under this guy. This guy, because even Tishner, we'll talk about Tishner later on. Okay, he was basically a student of Wundt who was from England, but they couldn't get a psychology class in England, and so he went to Leipzig and studied under Wundt. Okay. Also, this guy, Fechner, is also a student of Wundt. He's the founder of psychophysics. And one of the most important people, particularly in the study of mental health, Emil Kraepelin, was also a student of Wundt. Okay. In other words, like I said, putting psychology, a study of consciousness, what he called that time, under laboratory conditions. And Kraepelin was one of the first people to document the different types of mental illness. In other words, what we call DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, was inspired by Kreplin's research. And so Wundt's influence in psychology goes a long way. Now let's talk about the functionalists. Who were the functionalists? Functionalists were students of Wundt who felt that Wundt was too narrow. And so they came to the United States and started their own school of thought. Some of the people who were influenced by the functionalist movement were Darwin, and particularly a movement called Western expansion. Let's talk about Darwin. Okay, Darwin was the author of The Origin of Species, but Darwin caused a major paradigm shift in the thinking of people at that time. Remember, 1800s considered the age of reasoning. Okay, and so Darwin was one of the people who challenged that to a certain extent. And I always say Darwin's research is probably one of the most misquoted and misinterpreted pieces of literature, maybe second only to the Bible, what Darwin said versus what people said that Darwin said. I mean, Darwin never said man evolved from apes. There's a Bishop Wilberforce who's trying to discredit Darwin by saying, well, if you read this book, you will believe man evolved from apes. So it actually calls for inspiration to people reading it. But Darwin started out in a school to be a minister, but then he got tired of school. He got a job on the ship called the Beagle. And one of the things that made Darwin famous was that he basically documented, drew pictures, and took samples and described everything he saw. I mean, in other words, this is a map company, went around the South Africa, coming around the Horn, and stuff come up around South America, all around trying to make out a map. And so, and like I said, he was a chronicler of the ship. He took all the notes and everything. Okay, he noticed there were turtles every place he went. There are turtles with flippers, turtles with claws. Okay, there are trees everywhere, but different types of trees depending on where you found. And one of the things he talked about is all living things, they either adapt or they perish. Okay, all living things either adapt or they perish. Okay, but the significance of Darwin was he marked the birth of biology as a science. The birth of biology as a science. Looks like that's where we're going to have to end it with Darwin, and we're going to have to continue on Aristotle the Plagiarist. Next Aristotle Plagiarist to talk a little bit some of the political and psychological implications of Darwin. Once again, Friday, this Music Day, and also Rainier Avenue Radio giving that at the Columbia City Theater, and also Juneteenth. Okay, it's another celebration coming up this weekend, and so we're looking forward to those events. And so at this point, thank you for your time, and I'll see you next week.